Hey guys, today we're going to be learning how to add some crepuscular rays to your photos. Now all you landscape photographers out there know and love crepuscular rays. They're those awesome God beams that shoot out of bright sunny skies and light up moisture in the atmosphere to create some visible beamage. And this photo already has a couple of them, as you can see here, real faint in the background, but I want more. So I'm just going to show you a real quick and easy way to add tons of crepuscular rays to your photos should you choose to do that. Before we begin, it's really important to note that you gotta add these to the right kind of photo. You can't just go around willy-nilly adding crepuscular rays to every photo. It's going to look ridiculous. The best kind of photo to add them to are shots like the one you see here, where you've got backlit clouds. That way you're going to see the light beams coming through the clouds, and it's going to add a much more realistic effect. So before we get into the actual beamage, there's a couple of things I want to do just to clean up this image a little bit. I opened it up in RAW already and converted it into a TIFF that I'm working with now. And if we go up here into the shadows, you can see there's a couple of splashes that I need to get rid of. Whatever this is, probably a bird or a fly. And I want to clean up some of this noise. So just really quickly, the noise first, that's just going to be using a third-party plugin that I use called Neat Image to reduce the noise, and I'm usually really happy with this if it just takes care of itself. So I hit auto profile and OK, let it churn away, and sure enough, boom, got rid of all that nice noise. Okay, next thing, I want to get rid of these little water droplets and that little specul. So the easiest, cleanest way that I like to do this, you can use a clone stamp tool, the healing brush tool, the spot healing tool, ContentAware fill. There's all kinds of ways to do this. I'm just going to choose ContentAware fill today. Yeah, no particular reason. I just really like the way Photoshop cleans things up. So go ahead and hit L to get into my lasso tool. And then I'm just going to draw a circle around this little blemish and hit delete. And when it brings up this window, I'm going to go click ContentAware and OK. And sure enough, you can see, boom, it did an awesome job of cleaning up that speck. Same thing with this water drop right here. I'm just going to circle it as close as I can, hit delete, okay. Sure enough, that guy is gone. And one last one over here. Delete, content aware, boom. You can see what just a killer job it does of cleaning up stuff like that. I'm sure I could spend all day going through that. Oh, hey, let's clean up this boat. Why the heck not? So long, boat. And he's gone. But we don't need to do that. That's not the point of the tutorial. This is all about light beams. Unless you see somebody you really don't like. Like this guy. What's he doing? Searching for hidden treasure? Not anymore. Gone. Alright. Okay, let's get into this. It's getting a little ridiculous. Okay. So, in order to make the light beams, we're basically going to be making a selection of all of the light areas of our photo and then blurring them to create kind of a beamly look. So what I'm actually going to do first of all is to enhance those light areas in the photo so I get as much beamage as possible. So in my layers palette, I'm going to go ahead and add a levels adjustment layer. And with that, I'm just going to drag the white point down, which is going to brighten the image and create lots and lots of nice bright highlights for me to work with. Now notice that I'm not doing this as a direct levels adjustment, but as an adjustment layer so that I'm not screwing up my underlying photo. I can always turn that on or off as need be. Sweet dude. Okay, so now we got lots of sweet, nice highlights to work with. And you know what? I realize that's not going to work because it's going to screw up the underlying tonality of our image, which I don't want because I kind of like this dark feel. So forget that. Let's not do that. We're going to do something else instead. All right. All right. Here's what we're going to do. In my colors palette, I'm going to go ahead and hit D to get my default colors, and then X, which switches the colors around and puts white as my foreground color. Now I'm going to go to Select Color Range. And the cool thing about color range is that whatever you've got selected as your foreground color is the default color selection when you click on color range. So if I hit color range right now, what it's going to do is it's going to find all the whites in my photo. And here's my fuzziness slider. So the less fuzzy this is, the closer to pure white the tones have to be in order to be selected. And the more fuzzy it is, you can see obviously the less close to pure white the tones have to be. So I don't want to select the whole image, I just want the lightest bits right here. And what I'm going to do is maybe something like that. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And this is just going to select the lightest bits of my image. There you can see I've got a nice selection. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is hit Control J on a PC or Command J on a Mac, and that is going to make a new layer based off the selection that I just created. So if I go ahead and remove the visibility of my background layer, you can kind of see that I just have this weird cloudy layer selected. And let me make a new layer in between here really quickly so you can see exactly. There's my selection. That's what it looks like. So you can say I have all those bright parts of those clouds visible. So let me go ahead and delete that layer because I don't need that. I just wanted to show you guys. Okay, so now comes the fun part. What we're going to do on this layer is we're going to go ahead and make that levels adjustment again. And now since I don't care, since I'm not working with my actual background layer, I am just going to go ahead and do a straight up levels adjustment and not a levels adjustment layer. So hitting Control L or Command L brings up my levels adjustment, and I'm just going to make those nice and bright by dragging down my white points. Very cool. Okay, now we get to actually make some rays. So this is really pretty straightforward. All we're going to do is go to Filter, Blur, and then go down here to Radial Blur. And what's cool about Radial Blur is it lets you choose two types of blur. You can do a spin blur if you want to add like motion to wheels and things like that in your photos, or you can do a zoom blur, which will, well, what does it do? It zooms. Okay, so what I like to do is go ahead and put the amount of the blur all the way up to 100, and then you have to pick the center of where you want the blur to originate from. And what's stupid about Photoshop is it doesn't let you pick on the photo itself, so you just kind of have to estimate where you want it to be coming from with this little grid display here. And the most realistic look you're going to get is if you try to estimate where the sun is, and I'm going to guess the sun is right here in this photo, and that's where we want our beams to be coming from since that's our light source. So it looks to me like it's kind of about a third of the way down from the top and maybe 40% of the way in from the left hand, from the right hand side. So something like that. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now what it's going to do is turn away a little bit, and it's going to blur out those highlights into these awesome streaks. Boom, cool. All right, so now you can see kind of where our effect is coming from, but we're not done yet because I want to make those streaks long enough that they reach the ground. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit Control F on a PC or Command F on a Mac to run that filter again once. Oh, poor little computer, and its lowly 8 megabytes of RAM. And again. There we go. All right, cool. Now we've got filters go ahead and reaching all the way down to the ground here. And if I turn this layer off, you should be able to see the effect that I'm going for. All right. Now we're not quite done yet, because what I really want is to intensify the effect of these beams down here coming out of the clouds. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control or Command J a couple of times to duplicate my beam layer. And you can see that's going to make my beams just way too intense in certain spots, but that's okay, because we're going to go ahead and create a mask to knock them out. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and hit Shift and click on all of these layers to select them, and hit Control or Command G to create a group out of those layers. And you can if you want, you can name this something like beams or ducks or dogs, whatever you want to name it. I'm going to name it beams. Okay, now what I'm going to do is go down here in my layers palette and add a layer mask. So this lets me go ahead and mask out all the bits where I don't want the beams to show up. So one thing you have to realize when you do that zoom blur is that it doesn't just zoom. Say you have a let's see here. Let's add another layer really quickly, just for demonstration purposes. So say you have a streak like this, and you add a zoom blur to it. Ideally, what would happen is it would just zoom sort of from the center to the outside. But what zoom blur actually does is it creates a zoom going back towards the center as well. So we need to delete that because it doesn't make any sense for light to be coming from these highlights here and shining up into the sky. We only want the light that's going down towards the ground like this. So that's another thing that we're going to do with our layer mask right now is delete that stuff. So first thing I want to do is select a nice big soft brush with a black color here and an opacity of maybe 40%. And I'm just going to paint on my layer mask and knock out these areas where the beams are just ridiculously too bright. And because I'm painting on a layer mask, if I decide that I do it too much, I can always go back and re-add it. Okay, so maybe that is a little bit too much. Let me add some more of those beams back. Yeah, something like that. There we go. Okay, now like I said, one of the things you got to realize is that the beams kind of shine up out of everywhere. And we don't want that. We want it just to be coming down from the sky. And so on our layer mask here, wherever we have these dark areas of clouds like this, we're going to mask that out because the light is going to be coming from this light area shining down towards the ground, not shining back up towards the sky. So I'm just going to mask out those dark areas. Now what's going to be cool about this is the other thing is it's going to create a layering effect with these light beams. So for example, it's gonna, because our layer is, our beam is actually on top of our bottom layer, on top of our background layer, all the beams are actually on top of these clouds. We don't necessarily want that. We want the beams to look like they're shining through these highlights behind these clouds, right? So by using that layer mask to kind of mask out these clouds, it creates that effect. And you can see if I hit shift and click on the layer mask, what effect that creates. It really creates a nice kind of layering. Let me zoom out. You can see that a little bit better. So now it looks like the light beams are actually coming from behind the clouds and not just on top of them. So let me go ahead and brush out some of these areas here. Maybe brush out a little bit back in here so the light's coming down from the top. Maybe if I brush out these clouds, the light will look like it's coming from behind them. Okay, and let me just check the look there. Yeah, so that's cool. Now it looks like the beams are actually kind of coming down from behind these clouds instead of just in front of them. The other thing we got to watch out for, you can see that the beams are kind of over the ocean here, which is not realistic. If they were behind those clouds, they'd be shining onto the ocean and not in front of it. So using that black brush, I am just going to go ahead, 100% opacity, and remove some of the beams over the ocean like this. All right, now that one is pretty bright, so maybe it would be shining over the ocean, but not all the way crazily like it was. So I'm just going to use a lower opacity brush and kind of mask some of that out. Alrighty, so that's looking pretty cool. If I turn off my beams, you can see the effect there. We do have some nice beams shining through our clouds a little bit. I think it would be cool actually if there were some beams shining out of this area over here. Whoops. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and basically duplicate that same process. I'm going to go ahead and make a new selection of just this area using my lasso tool on my background layer. And then I'm going to go to my brush tool and hold Alt, which brings up my eyedropper so that I can sample this color right there. Then if I go to select color range, it'll hopefully highlight just those guys perfectly. And let me lower that a little bit. Okay, right there. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do, same thing, I'm going to make another layer using just that selection, so Control or Command J, and then Control or Command L. Something's beeping at me. I don't know what. Oh my God. And I'm going to go ahead and increase the brightness of just that spot. Now you can see we're getting weirdness from our selection. That's okay because it's going to A, be blurred, and B, we're going to mask it out. Anyway, what I really want is just to intensify these highlights over here so that I can create some nice beams coming down through there. So let's go ahead now and go our same filter, and it's already selected from before. So again, if I just hit Control or Command F, should give us a sweet little blur matching the same line from before from the sun. There we go. Now we got some nice beams, but you can see they're super duper faint. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control or Command J a couple of times. Boy, it's really bringing out some ugly noise in there. Well, not sure what's causing that exactly. It must just be some noise in the photo, or it's probably weirdness with the selection. That's what it is. It's an inaccurate selection. So there's probably a cleaner way to do that. But I have to think about it, and I don't want you guys to sit there and watch the tutorial with me going, I don't know what to do. So we're just going to go ahead and stick with this for now. So what can we do here? Now we're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing. Although this time I think what I want to do with these layers to make that beam come out really nice and bright is go ahead and switch the layer blending mode to color dodge, and that should really intensify those beams. You can also pick something like hard light or vivid light, and that'll play. Boy, I really don't like that noise. I'm going to see what I can do to clean that up actually. Let me delete these layers. Really, really ugly, that noise. Let's go back to normal. And so let's take it all the way back on our history to where we made that selection and our levels adjustment. That's where the noise came from. It's quite strange. I bet if we just kind of blur this a little bit more by going to blur, Gaussian blur, and moving that radius down really low, we can eliminate a lot of that noise. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Yeah, there we go. That's working out pretty good. Okay, so we're keeping a lot of our nice lines, but we're getting rid of all that granularity. Bitchin'. Okay, now that we've got that cleaned up a little bit, let's go ahead and duplicate it again. Control or Command J. There we go. Now we got some nice beams without the ugly, ugly grain. So same deal. I'm going to go ahead and highlight all of these and change that to color dodge. Really want to bring out the intensity of, well, that might be a little too much because it doesn't match the other bits. So let's go back to normal. Yeah, normal will be totally sufficient. Okay, so same thing. Control or Command G to group those. We're going to name that Beams 2. And same deal. We're going to add a layer mask now. And we're going to go in with our black brush at kind of a high opacity, maybe 90%, because we only want that, remember, we only want that light to look like it's shining from out of these clouds right here. So above it, we're going to go ahead and just erase that beam. Okay, there we go. And remember, it shouldn't be shining on over the ocean, it should be shining onto the ocean. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this down here as well. I need a smaller brush to clean that up. Okay. So now, if I go ahead and zoom out a little bit for the macro scale view, it should look, yeah, like we've got some nice, oh, holy, totally missed that whole spot over there. That's what you get for zooming in too far. Let me get rid of that. Okay. Cool. Now let's take a look at that and see if that looks pretty. That looks pretty good. Looks like we got some nice beams coming out of this. This is a bit funky over here, so I'm going to mask that out a little bit, and using a lower opacity, maybe mask out some of this a little bit more like that. Cool. Now if we turn that on and off, it should give us a nice, yeah, look at that. Nice set of beams coming out. One last thing, though, is that where those beams are shining onto the ocean, well, the ocean should be a little bit brighter, right? So we're going to go ahead and dodge the ocean a little bit to kind of bring out that brightness where it should be a little bit brighter. And the way I like to do this, there's a ton of different ways you can dodge and burn in Photoshop. My favorite way is to create a new layer, which is Control Command Shift N, and then go ahead and change the mode to soft light. And then you can ask it to fill with a soft light neutral color, and it'll bring up a totally just gray layer, which is a 50% gray. You can see if I click on it, it's just pure gray. But the cool thing about soft light is that anything that appears on the soft light layer that's brighter than middle gray brightens the pixels on the layer beneath it, and anything that's darker than middle gray darkens the pixels beneath it. So you can see if I use a black brush and I paint on this soft light layer, it darkens everything below it. And conversely, if I use a white brush and I paint on the layer below it, well, it brightens everything below it. Pretty cool. So I'm going to use a sort of a low opacity brush, like 30%, and I'm just going to look at where the light beams are the brightest, where they're striking the ocean, and I'm just going to sort of add some, well, that's way too much. So let me pop that down to like 10%. And I'm just going to add a little bit of brightness along that spot. Let's zoom out and see how we're looking. A little bit more. Alrighty. No, that's not the cleanest. I really don't like the way that's looking. Let's get rid of that, because what it's actually doing is that sort of that brush, because it's big and soft, is brightening the sky as well as the foreground. And that's not what we want. So let's try something else instead. If we duplicate, let's duplicate one of these layers, and then pull it out of that group. Right. So now it's out of that layer mask and it's showing up everywhere again. That's not a problem. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and transform this. So hitting Control or Command T, and then right clicking in there, and I'm going to hit Skew, and I want to pull this to more of like a vertical orientation instead of that diagonal one. So I really want these beams to sort of like look like shimmers on the water now instead of beams, so they need to be vertical. Alright, and I'm not going for super duper accuracy here, but what I'm going to try to do is align these beams with the brightest bits of the underlying beams. And so what I'm looking at is this area right here, where I've got bright beams behind and bright beams in front. So if I do something kind of like that, it looks like it lines up. Now I do have to keep in mind that the wide angle on my lens is creating a little bit of distortion. And so it's going to create angles more like that than vertical. It's probably not that extreme, so let me drag that back out a little bit. Something like that. And let me line up those bright bits again. Okay, groovy. Now I've got something like that to help me with a little bit of shimmer in my water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the blend mode on that to soft light. And let's see what kind of effect that gives me. Just adds a little bit. Let me duplicate that layer. There we go. Cool. I'm going to group those layers, Control Command G. And now I want to add a layer mask. And I'm going to use my black brush with a high opacity to paint out all this stuff in the sky, because I really just want the stuff on the water. Alright, so if we turn that on and off, let's see what kind of effect we get. Just a bare amount of, what if we change this to hard light? That's better. Whoops, wrong button. I want to paint that on the mask. Get that light beam to kind of show up there. It's too vivid. Let me paint out some of it there. Okay. That's still a bit too much here, but it's looking all right there. All right, sweet. Now we're looking good. So that's still too much right there. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. So let's see what effect. That's definitely better, adding a little bit of more dimension. And those beams looking pretty cool. So if we turn it all on or off now, you can see what we got. We got great beams. Sure enough, look at this. This is really cool. Watch these clouds here when I turn the beams on and off. It looks like they're shining behind them, right? Instead of across the top. That's pretty cool. Same with these beams here. And then let's check out what those beams look like. Yeah, they look like they're shining from out of those clouds. So pretty sweet. All right, cool. And that's a tutorial on how to add light beams. It ended up being a little more complicated than I intended it to be, um, but that's okay. That there's hopefully some good information there for you guys about some Photoshop tricks and things to keep in mind when you're doing this sort of thing. Oh, hold on a second. What is this going on up here? There's like this weird... Oh, it vanished. It was like this weird posterization. There it is. Must just be when I zoom in, it disappears. I don't see any. It must just be a low res like rendering thing because of the video capture. Anyway, all right, cool. Until next time, guys. Josh Cripps here from Sea to Summit Photography Workshops.